The central theme of the policies devised by those statesmen over the past 2 centuries is not one of isolationism reluctantly abandoned somewhere in the interval between September 1939 and December 1941. Rather, the central theme of U.S. foreign policy is expansionism, beginning in the wake of the American Revolution and continuing down to the present day. Well, what did this expansionist project aim to achieve? In the 19th century, the emphasis was on the acquisition of territory and on the opening of markets abroad. For a brief moment after 1898, that focus shifted to the acquisition of colonies, a brief, unhappy experiment with formal empire that was soon abandoned. Then in the 20th century, the focus shifted again, and the priorities became these: political stability, economic and military access, adherence to American norms, and, in strategically critical regions, outright hegemony. To sum it up in a single phrase, an expansionist foreign policy sought the creation of an informal empire. Well, what means did the United States employ to achieve these aims? Put simply, whatever was necessary and whatever worked. At various times, the U.S. policy emphasized diplomacy and dissembling, threats and coercion, invasion and conquest, infiltration and filibustering, acquisitions paid for with cold hard cash, and population removal, or what we would today call ethnic cleansing. With what results? Well, apart from several missteps along the way, and one might cite here the annexation of the Philippines, the mishandling of Cuba, and the Vietnam War as prime examples, apart from several missteps along the way, the strategy of expansionism proved wildly successful. It was not a morally uplifting enterprise. Statecraft seldom is. It was, however, a remarkably effective enterprise. As a result, by the midpoint of the 20th century, around the time I was born, the United States had become, inarguably, the most powerful, the richest, and in the eyes of the white majority at least, the freest nation on the face of the earth. Now let me emphasize in particular that last point, the emphasis on freedom. Expansion enhanced American power. Power brought with it material abundance. And incrementally over time, abundance made freedom accessible to an ever-growing percentage of the American people. To put it another way, abundance, that is the anticipation and the reality of an ever larger economic pie, endowed our political system with an elasticity that enabled and encouraged political leaders to deal with social problems through the distribution of largesse, cutting into the American dream those who had been excluded or marginalized without requiring the privileged to make any significant sacrifices. Politically, there was no need to rob Peter to pay Paul. There was enough to go around to satisfy the demands of both. Granted, none of this happened quickly or without struggle by the deprived and the oppressed. Indeed, it was not until the United States reached the acme of its economic dominance in the 1950s and 1960s that the circle of freedom finally widened enough to admit blacks, women, Latinos, gays, and the disabled. But here's the problem. Right then in the 1960s, during the Vietnam War, this positive correlation between expansion, power, abundance, and freedom began to become undone. With few people taking proper notice, from that time forward, further efforts at expansionism have led to the squandering of American power. Expansionist policies have undercut American prosperity. And to the extent that the central government, and especially the executive branch, began to acquire excessive authority, the emphasis on expansionism abroad also began to compromise American freedom.